there, it's a beautiful spring-like day, and today my guest on the right key is vibraphonist Joe Locke. With over 190 credits to his name and an astounding 32 credits as a leader, Joe is one of the foremost vibraphonists in the world today. He's played with the who's who of jazz, and he's one of my oldest friends in New York City. So happy that you get to hear from him today. This series was conducted in the spring of 2020 via Instagram, and the audio and video quality do reflect that format. However, the words and insights of these guests are still priceless. Okay, Joe Locke is widely considered to be one of the finest vibraphone players in the world. He has over 190 recording credits to his name with 32 recordings as a leader or co-leader. 32! That's really sick. He's collaborated and recorded with artists such as Grover Washington, Eddie Palmieri, Diane Reeves, Rod Stewart, Eddie Henderson, Chick Corea, Russell Malone, Randy Brecker, the Beastie Boys.
Fun.
So yeah, there's a whole lot to talk about, but I like to go, I like to go kind of chronologically because it makes sense. And you're a Rochester boy.
That's right. I was born in California. I was born in Palo Alto, California. My father was teaching at Stanford University at the time. And people sometimes say, oh yeah, that makes sense. You got that West Coast vibe. And first of all, I absolutely do not have a West Coast vibe at all. But right. I was a year old when we moved to the East Coast, and we moved to Rochester, in upstate New York. And that's where I grew up. So I really consider myself a product of upstate New York,
Yeah. So, but Rochester has lots of famous musicians that came from there, were part of that scene. Either they came from that scene or they were part of that scene. Chuck and Gap Mangione, Vinny Ruggiero, right?
Man, I'm so glad you mentioned his name. He was hugely important. Yeah.
Yeah, he was, and his son Charles is in LA now. Charles is a swinging drummer.
His son Charles, man, scared me to death when I first heard him because I only knew his dad. And I did a record date with Charles long after his dad had passed away. And I had no idea. The last time I'd seen him, he was a baby. And he did this record date. And he was, first of all, he's an amazing drummer. And he had all the body English and gesticulations of his dad. Just an amazing talent, man. There's drums in the genes in that family. Charles is bad, man.
Yeah. And then, of course, Gad. You can't mention Rochester without Gad. But even Cab Calloway, I read, is originally from Rochester.
And Mitch Miller, sing along with Mitch.
That's right, Mitch Miller.
Yeah.
But who was around the scene when even before you were playing? Who was kind of hanging out and playing music in the city of Rochester when you were there?
Oh man, it's the amazing thing. It's funny. As long as we've known each other, I don't think we've ever talked about this. When I was growing up, so we're talking like I started playing professionally when I was 15. And even before that, I was interested in the music. And Rochester was really interesting, man, because there was all this stuff around jazz that was starting to show itself in the conservatory at the Eastman School of Music. There wasn't a jazz major at the time, but there were rumblings of interest in the music there. And there was a summer program called the Arranger's Holiday, where people like Stan Getz would come and rehearse with the big band and then do it. That would culminate in a concert, or Jerry Mulligan or Clark Terry or someone. And I used to sneak into those rehearsals and watch them in the process of getting the music together, So there was, and I was studying privately in the prep department of the Eastman School of Music, studying orchestral percussion, which I was terrible at, and studying, I didn't study vibes, but I took some theory lessons with Bill Dobbins, who was incredibly helpful to me. But at the same time, there was all this energy around the conservatory and great classical music. There was an incredible grassroots scene in the community. There was a club scene. There was it's sort of funny. There was a contingent in the Black community of amazing players. And there was a contingent in the Italian community of amazing players. And I kind of just went between all these different worlds. And actually, when I was about 16, my mom, who's Irish, you know, and I'm Irish and German and some other stuff, she looked at me and she said, "You know, Joe, you're not black or Italian. I'm just checking that you know that." You know, because all my friends were black and Italian, and all the best jazz musicians on the scene came from those communities, and it was really great to be a part of. I mean, when I was growing up, Steve Davis, the bass player who was in the Coltrane Quartet, who's on albums like Coltrane Jazz, Coltrane Plays the Blues, My Favorite Things. He had moved to Rochester with his wife Khadijah in 1968 or 69 to start working with actually with Gap Mangione, and after leaving James Moody's band, and I had a trio with Vinny Ruggiero and Steve, and I mean, learning from Vinny, who was a protege of Philly Joe Jones, who had played with the Bud Powell trio, who had subbed for Elvin in Train's band once, he was an amazing jazz drummer, but he also had a incredible wealth of knowledge, not only about the drums, but he could sing all of Train's solos from the Workin' Steam and Cookin' and Relaxin' albums of Miles. And he gave me all the Andrew White transcriptions of the Coltrane stuff, and would sing how the lines were supposed to sound, and take me through like transcriptions of stuff from those. So he was an amazingly erudite musician, but he was also really street, you know. And so it was wonderful to be part of that community. And I mean, I got my ass kicked on a regular basis just by being around older musicians on the scene. And the scene was great because there were all kinds of clubs happening, and I'd play all weekend, Friday and Saturday night. On Sunday, there was a club called the F&S Lounge where everybody would come after going to church. They would go from church to the F&S Lounge or the People's Club, and that would start at about maybe 2 p.m. and go till midnight. And there were just all kinds of great musicians who were on the scene at that time. And I felt like I caught the tail end of that beautiful sort of grassroots scene where the music and the social atmosphere were part and parcel of each other. You know, it was right. Like the music was part of the social fabric, and the social fabric was part of the music. And that was really beautiful to catch that, man. You know, to catch that the music is wrapped up in the community, and the community is wrapped up in the music, and they're intrinsically part of one another. So it was just beautiful to be able to catch that, man. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. But I want to back up a little bit, because you were growing up and you were listening before you started playing, before 14 or whatever. What were you listening to on the radio? Because your music, the music that you record now, is such a mixture, and there must be some early stuff that you were listening to that has shaped where the places you go. And
man, it's great to you know to think back on those times. I was the youngest of 4 kids, and I had older brothers and sisters who were really into music. My father was really into classical music and Gregorian chant and the Beatles. There was one night my dad listened to Sgt. Pepper's the Sgt. Pepper album 21 times back to back, because he was just digging it so much, you know. Wow. But my older brothers and sisters turned me on from a very young age to stuff like Procol Harum and Cream and Blind Faith and Santana and Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills and Nash, the Electric Flag. Harvey Brooks, who played with Miles, was in this band called the Electric Flag. He's also on Bitches Brew. And my older brother Chris, who was 12 years older than me, had a farm in the Catskills for a while, and Harvey Brooks was his neighbor down the street. So we would go fishing, like there was a trout stream on Chris's property, and we'd bump into Harvey on our way to the stream to go fishing. And I knew him from the Electric Flag, you know, so there was a lot of that music. A really important album to me, Henry, and this is something I could talk about for an hour, but one of the most important albums of my life was the eponymously titled album, The Band, with Robbie Robertson, Garth Hudson, you know, those guys, you know, men Levon Helm and those cats. And that was a really important album to me. And it's really funny, man, if I were to cite the two most kind of elemental albums for me that kind of shaped me early on, it was that album by The Band and Let Freedom Ring by Jackie McLean. And I had a conversation with a journalist in England about this, and it was like, why those two albums? But there's actually a commonality in those two albums, and I think what it is just the amazing honesty of the music, and this sort of letting the mistakes go, letting the stuff that's not perfect be in there as part of the more important thing, which is the humanity and the storytelling of the music. And when I listen to that album by The Band, that's what I hear. I hear people playing in real time. I hear the humanity of the music. And when I listen to Jackie's album, Let Freedom Ring with Walter Davis Jr., I hear Jackie's always a little sharp. He's always a little out of tune, but man, he's playing from his heart. And so I think I've always, and then you and I have played together and played lots of different kind of music stylistically, because you feel this vibe too, is that American music is a really deep well. And sometimes you go down and you dip in and you pull up Jackie McLean. And sometimes you go down and you pull up Levon Helm, or you pull up, Sam Cooke, or you pull up John Coltrane, or you pull up Mahalia Jackson, or, so it's and I think that kind of informed me in such a deep way that it stayed with me, up until now,
Yeah, man.
It was a time also, it was a time also when the stylistic boundaries hadn't been codified to the extent that they are now. The first Kool and the Gang album has a track. It's called, the name of the album is Cool Jazz, and it's Kool and the Gang. But there's a track on the album called I Remember John W. Coltrane. The music hadn't been codified yet. So it was really interesting, man. So
and I think the interesting thing is that maybe music's starting to go back that way a little, like the genres are blurring more, and it feels now that there's no ground anymore and no money, but maybe that allows music to be broader now. Maybe we're starting to see things open up a little more.
I feel that really strongly, man. I feel that the genres are getting blurred again in a really, really positive way. And it's really beautiful, man. I think we're getting back to, something more, it's funny, as the technology increases, we seem to be looking for that more organic place in the music again, which I think is great,
Well, that's when we strip away trying to look after commerce, then that's what's left, at least on the creative side.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
But I want to ask you, so you're listening to all this different music and you're listening to improvising music, and then you said to yourself, I'm going to pick one of the hardest instruments to play and try to improvise. Were you playing piano, or you just said, man, that's hard? Well, trombone's hard, but I want to choose something really hard.
It's funny, man. It's funny, man. I was playing drums. I had started to take drum lessons. When I was going to grade school, I went to Blessed Sacrament Catholic School, and Sister Sylvia was a nun who was at the time about 80 years old, and she taught all the instruments. And I don't think she necessarily knew how to play any of them, but she would get the night before the allotted lesson, whether it was someone taking a flute lesson or a clarinet lesson or a trumpet lesson, I think she would quickly read up on the Breeze Easy, the Breeze Easy method book, and learn as much as she could, and then try to pass what she had learned the night before onto the, the student. But that was the beginning of my drumming. And I had a little red sparkle snare drum that my mom got from the Sears catalog. And I remember the stand, the tripod bottom of the stand was broken. So I found a big hunk of styrofoam, and I just jammed the top of the stand into the styrofoam bottom so the red sparkle snare drum would stay up. And that was the beginning of my career as a drummer, my very short-lived career as a drummer. But my mother said to me, if you want to play drums, she got me a drum set eventually, and she said, if you want to play drums, you have to study piano, which was really prescient, actually, man. And she was the product of a Boston Catholic education where, like, young women at that time would learn French, and they would learn how to sight read at the piano. And she could sight read music, and every Sunday morning she would drag me out of bed and give me a piano lesson, and every Sunday would end in a fight. But somehow, but a lot of it sunk in through some divine intervention or osmosis or whatever it is. It started to sink in. But the story of the vibraphone is that my mother must have been a sadist, man, because she wanted me to play the glockenspiel in the marching band, and which is a really strange thing to want for your kid. I mean, the glockenspiel, man, the glockenspiel player in the marching band, the nerds lay for him after school to kick his ass and steal his lunch money.
That's right. That's right.
It's not the bottom of the totem pole. It's under the totem pole. And she came into my room one day and said, "Joe, I see an ad in the want ads in the newspaper for something called a vibraphone. I think that's like a glockenspiel. Let's go take a look at it." And I went with her, man, and it was a Genco vibraphone for $400.
Wow. Which was probably a pretty good bit of bread then.
Yes, but I mean, compared to the 4,000 and 5,000 that they cost now, I mean, it was a fantastic deal. Yeah. And I actually used it. I recorded the first time I made an album. I used the Genco vibraphone.
Wow.
But it was funny, man. I got the instrument, and it stayed in my room for a year. And I'm sure you can relate to this, man. I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't really into it. I was 12, and I put dirty clothes and books on top of it, and stuff like piled up on it. I used it as a table. And one Saturday afternoon, one of those rainy, boring Saturdays where there's nothing on TV, none of your friends are in the neighborhood, there's nothing to do. I said, okay. And I took the books and the dirty clothes off the vibraphone, and I started playing it. And that was the beginning. That day, what changed my life. It was like, okay, let me see what this thing is about. And I can remember the day that I started to play the vibes, it's
that's amazing.
The memory that's just really strong still,
Yeah. And when you developed and you were playing in the scene, and you talked about all these influences in the scene, you were playing in Rochester, and then when did you move to New York?
Wow, man. Yeah. After I got out of high school, a week out of high school, I got a call from John Spider Martin, who was a tenor player, who was sort of in the Johnny Griffin mold. And he was touring, and he called my mother and asked me if I'd go to Bermuda with the band for 2 months. And I went to Bermuda, and Onaje Allen Gumbs was down there on vacation, and I was a huge fan of his from Woody Shaw's band. So he played with us every night, and James Moody was down there, and so it was like, wow, this is amazing. And I played with Spider for 2 years after that, and at about the age of 20, after playing with him for 2 years, I thought, okay, what am I going to do? And I tried going back to, all my friends were going to college. And I went, all right, I guess I should go to college. And I registered at Brockport State College. And the plan was, okay, I'm going to get my grades like really rocking for a semester or two, and then I'm going to I'm going to transfer to Juilliard or something, you know. Or I went to I went to classes for one day. And then I found a practice room that had a piano in it, and I just hid out in the practice room. And after about a week, I said to I said to my father, I said, "Man, I can't do this." You know, it was like I've been in the world of adults and in the jazz scene for too long to try to go back and be a kid again. You know, you know, if I could do it again, I would have done things a lot differently, I'm sure. But I was kind of already in the life, you know, and I thought, boy, I really felt like a stranger in a strange land, you know, trying to go back to college. So I moved to New York, and man, I moved to New York with $200 in my pocket and not a clue. And it was, I found through my friend Ned Otter, who was a tenor player. I found an apartment in a building on the corner of Christopher and Washington Street that they called the White Elephant. It's a place where the cops would go on the weekend, either Friday or Saturday night. The cops would shoot craps in the lobby, and it was also like the heart, like it was sort of the heart and soul of the gay community at the time, and it was just on the eve of the AIDS crisis, of the AIDS epidemic. But it was before the AIDS crisis really hit. So Christopher Street was.
Would this have been like 1980 or 81 or when?
81, exactly, 81, and Christopher Street was all the way live, man. It was really deep, and it was just amazing being there. And my downstairs neighbor was Red Rodney, who played with Charlie Parker.
What a scene! What a vibrant scene at that time, you know.
It was just amazing, man. And I remember I would go to move my car. I had a Dodge Dart that was falling apart, but I would have to get up at 7 to change the side of the street. Yeah. And I would walk downstairs, and more often than not, Red would be there, taking his wife's toy poodle out to pee. And I'd have a conversation with Red Rodney, and he'd be talking about the asparagus that he had the night before, it's in season, or this that he went to this movie with his wife, and you know, blah blah blah. And it would always hit me. I'm talking to albino Red. So it was deep. And I'd see Dexter Gordon walking into my building because he was friends with Red, and I would just like stand there and go, "That's Dexter Gordon. He's real. He's not a mythic figure in the ether. He's actually flesh and blood." You know. So moving to New York was such an amazing thing. And Henry, I was so clueless, man. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have I just was like, okay, here we go. You know.
But I think that's a lot of musicians, and especially with New York being what it is, and you come here and you say, I hope I can make some music here, and you hope you can get your ass kicked, or later you figure out that that's what you're hoping for, because that's what helps you grow. But you and I talked about after this interview with Adam Rogers and talking about playing in the street. You and I talked about playing in the street, and I didn't play in the street, but you told me that you did. I
played on the street. It was a way that a lot of us made money. I mean, Adam was talking about, playing with the BMF band with Vince Herring. I remember that band. I used to play with a saxophonist named George Braith. George Braith was a really interesting cat. He made about 5 albums on the Blue Note label with Billy James and Don Patterson, and he was an amazing saxophone player. But he played the Braithophone, which was 2 saxophones, an alto and a C melody that were welded together. And he was doing it. He was doing it at the same time. He may have even predated Rahsaan Roland Kirk doing it. Wow! But he would create melodies and play like both horns. And there was an alto player named C Sharp who had recorded with Lee Morgan and played with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and he's just an amazing bebop alto player. And Tommy Turrentine, the brother of Stanley, and Cindy Blackman at various times, you know, who's gone on to do such amazing things. And we'd play on the street and the Johnson brothers, Mark and Billy Johnson, but we would play on the street for 12 hours a day, every day.
12 hours.
I'd get up at 7 o'clock. I'd put my vibes into a cab and go up to 42nd Street and 6th Avenue, and we would hit all day. And I would come back. I would have like just dirt on my hands, just from not from putting them into the dirt, but from the atmosphere in Midtown. Like after 12 hours playing and sweating, you were just funky, you know.
Wow.
And George was really, he would turn down gigs at clubs because it would infringe upon his street playing.
Wow.
He felt like that was his thing, that was his place. And he was as serious as a heart attack about it, man. He'd play tunes like Lover and Cherokee at the fastest tempo, you know, I could play, and Lover Come Back to Me, and You and the Night in the Music, and then obscure ballads that and if you didn't know him, man, you'd hear about it, you know.
Wow.
But it was really deep, and cats would fight each other for the spot. Like if we showed up, I remember a couple times showing up at 42nd and 6th, and cats had found out that we had a good spot that attracted a lot of people, and they'd be there before us, and it would almost came to blows a couple times. Like it got really deep of like, sort of claiming our turf, you know, defending our turf, you know. So it was really, it was amazing. It was a time of struggle, but it was those days of struggle, in hindsight, are very beautiful. Those are beautiful memories, because it was a time when all of us were struggling together, you know.
Yeah.
That you'd come home after playing all day and put your money together with your roommates and get like a green pepper and some onions, and, you know, and mix some barbecue sauce and some rice together, and that'd be dinner. And then go out and hear music, you know, stand on the stairs of the Village Vanguard because you didn't have the money to get in, but you could listen from the stairs, you know, all those things that in retrospect are real sweet, you know, that were real formative and started to make me feel like a New Yorker, you know.
But it wasn't too long in New York before you started recording, because in 1983, you have this record with Phil Markowitz, Eddie Gomez, and Keith Copeland.
That was so deep, man, because in '83, Phil Markowitz, if I had one teacher, because I'm self-taught really, but if there's one person that I could say was my teacher, it was Phil Markowitz, who I'm still in touch with, and he's an amazing pianist, as you know, man. He was, when I was 13, and he was a senior at the Eastman School of Music, and had a trio called Petrus. Man, Henry, I gotta find recordings of Petrus, but they were killing, man. They were sort of like influenced by Weather Report, like the first Weather Report album, and Phil played Rhodes like with an Echoplex attached, and Gordie Johnson on acoustic and electric bass, and Ted Moore, and these guys were my heroes. And Phil was my teacher, and but he moved to New York and started recording like with the Brecker Brothers and Jack Wilson, and Jack Wilkins, and playing with Lieb and doing all kinds of things. But he tapped me to do. That's right. We got called to do an album in Rochester at a place called the Little Theater. And Phil and I had started a quartet with Eddie Gomez and Keith Copeland.
Right.
And played a couple of gigs. We played 7th Avenue South for a weekend. And I was in heaven, man, because I'm playing with my erstwhile teacher, who I loved, and Keith Copeland, who I had been listening to because of the Heath Brothers. He was playing with the Heath Brothers at the time. And Eddie Gomez, who was a legend, you know. and to be embraced by these cats and be in a band with them was just it was just awesome, man. And we got called to do an album, and we did this album back in Rochester. It was a live concert with those cats, and it's called Live in Front of the Silver Screen. And we did a bunch of gigs after that, and it was just great. It was sort of like a beginning. Phil and I, he called me. Oh man, you have to tell me to shut up, or I'll just keep going.
Yeah.
Phil called me. I had spent one summer in New York City in a studio apartment with one window and no air conditioning, and it was rough. My first summer. The second summer, Phil Markowitz called me to do a gig 3 nights a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, at a club in East Hampton, Long Island called Jeremy's.
Oh my God!
Playing duo with Phil, and it was the most amazing thing because I'd spend Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in New York, sweating my ass off, and then
you'd go out there,
drive with Phil out to the island and play for 3 nights and hang out on the beach all day. And Bradley Cunningham, who owned this amazing piano bar called Bradley's, which was legendary, where I used to go all the time and hear Kenny Barron and John Hicks and George Cables and Tommy Flanagan and Hank Jones and all these great people and Art Blakey and Betty Carter and Phyllis Diller and we're like hanging at the bar, and it was just an amazing scene. And Bradley came into the club in East Hampton one night, and we were on a break. He was hanging at the bar having dinner, and Bradley called me over and he said, "Kid," he said, "do you know these foolish things remind me of you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Would you play it for me?" So we went back up and we played These Foolish Things Remind Me of You, and he gave us a week at Bradley's. And that's where I met, Kirk Lightsey and John Hicks and Cecil McBee and George Coleman and Kenny Barron and just a George Mraz and Gary Bartz and all these different people. And I thought it was a case of, okay, now I've arrived, now I'm on the uphill trajectory. And I learned that's not how it works, man. You have these moments where it's like, oh, that was beautiful. Then you go back to playing on the street, or back to, hoping the phone rings, hoping you get a gig,
Yeah.
But
there's no tenure. There's no tenure. There's no tenure as a freelance performing musician.
Yes, man. It's man, thank you for the opportunity, Henry, man. Just to remember this stuff, man, and because it's all in there still, man. All those memories are which it's great to get them out, man. To express them.
But and then I've been interested to talk to you about Concept because you were always composing. You're quite a prolific composer, and people say, "Oh, Joe Locke, he's an incredible vibraphonist." But they should also know how much you've composed. And even for that 1983 record, I think you had 3 compositions of your own on that record, and then all the records coming forward, and then your more recent records are, all your compositions. And you've had a long process of evolving with your compositions and stuff you're hearing in your head. And it seems like it's a little rare for early artist records to have original compositions, especially for that period. A lot of people were recording standards and things like that. Was composing something you always wanted to do, or you thought the impetus of that?
It's funny, man. I look back on my catalog from Steeplechase Records, which was it was a low budget label, sort of like Crisscross, although I think Crisscross became much more visible.
Right.
With the people who they signed. But it was great to get the opportunity to record for Steeplechase, first with Eddie Henderson in a quintet with Kenny Barron, Wayne Dockery, and Billy Hart, or Victor Lewis.
1994.
Huh?
You've done me.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. but that's, and from recording with Eddie, I mean, this is how it goes, isn't it, man? Like you're playing with someone and you do a record with them as a side man, and the label owner says, hey, I'd like you to do your own record. You know, it kind of just flows like that. But when I look back at my Steeplechase catalog, man, I think now to myself, I think, man, you didn't write enough. Like, you should have written more. You should have taken, if you were more diligent, and if you took it more seriously, you would have had more of your own music. But I have to say, man, it's been a process for me. I did what I did at the time, and I don't regret it, or I can't undo it, because a lot of the stuff that I was dealing with at that time, yeah, there were always some originals, but there were tunes that I needed to address. Like I recorded Giant Steps because I needed to work on Giant Steps and document it in some way. You know, I recorded a tune called Quiet Now by Denny Zeitlin because I was trying to understand that music. And I think the balance of original material and standards or other jazz pieces, it was just important to me at the time. And I wasn't sure really exactly who I was either. I remember that my playing ability, the music I was writing, I wasn't so comfortable playing on. It wasn't until later that I felt like my playing and my writing sort of came together as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But it's in the last like 15 years, I think my writing has gotten a lot better. It's gotten a lot more personal, but it's been a journey to get there. You know, I really admire young musicians who already have a fully developed pen. I mean, there's some amazing young composers, man. And
Sure.
I admire them.
It's a process, like you said, and I think that people grow and they understand more. But starting young, you know, you were relatively young on that first record, and using that muscle is, I think, you know, indispensable, because it helps you grow your voice and figure out where you're headed with music.
Yeah. And I think it started off at a very young age, because I played in a rock band called Tullamore Dew, which is the name of an Irish whiskey, you know, and I was like 12, 13, 14. I was still playing rock drums, but all the guys in the band were like 4 years older than me, but we all wrote. It was an original rock band. Like, we wrote words and music. Wow. And that was probably, you know, I think we are musically who we are essentially at the beginning, you know.
In a way, yeah. I think I don't think we ever escaped that.
Yeah. And
that's why I always ask these questions about the formative music, you know. Yeah,
man. And I think even like stylistically as jazz improvisers, though, the essential kind of you-ness, you know, if that's a word, you know, the essential part of who you are is there from the beginning, and it's fine-tuned over the years. You know, I hear that in a lot of players, and then it's a journey of tuning it, you know, and finessing it, and yeah.
And you released so many albums, and you kept evolving and growing your concept. And I know that I talked about this with some other interviews, how your concept can change and will evolve, and you'll be in a different place. And we talked about the idea of an album as a snapshot. And I really feel like you've had some very strong concepts about certain albums, and thinking about having an album have a feeling, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Your albums, you know, if you think about the difference between your album Beauty Burning, or the difference between that and some of your more recent albums, and you can't necessarily say, well, I like this one better or I like that one better, but they were all strong feelings. I don't feel like you went into the studio and said, whatever, you know.
Yeah, it's funny, man. For me, that's why I feel strong about my more recent albums. I always kind of cringe when somebody mentions an old album that I'm a little, not embarrassed about, but I didn't feel I was really in the zone.
That's a moment in time, and you can't beat yourself up about that.
Yes.
You've always played the hell out of the instrument. And you've always been swinging, and that was a capture of that moment.
Yeah. I guess so, man. You know, I think for me, you know, now I always feel, man, that I've had sort of a compositional side where I want to write stuff that's certainly not as through composed as a whole lot of people who are writing, you know, today, but really more through composed, you know, very involved piano parts and original pieces that don't have typical, you know, A, B, C forms. And then I have this other side, man, that I want to get back. I want to get back to Jenks and Jones Lounge on Genesee Street in Rochester. And I want to play music that's for folks. That you know, and sometimes you want the head chakra to be touched, and the, you know, the heart chakra is always really important to me. But so is below the waist. That below the waist kind of, it's not that music should be something to make folks feel better. People who are dealing with life on life's terms, how do they, what can you give them just to make them feel better, to help them get through their day, you know, because as music has helped me get through my day, you know. And so I feel like I made a couple albums for Motema when I was with that label, and one of them, Love is a Pendulum, is one I'm very proud of, and it really has a compositional slant. And it features,
believe me,
you know,
I'm planning to talk about them.
Oh,
but yeah,
it features some amazing people, and it really has a compositional slant. But the album I did either right after that was called Lay Down My Heart, and that album is called Blues and Ballads Volume 1. And Lay Down My Heart was the other side. It was all about below the waist. It was all about, man, some melodies. If you don't know anything about music, anything about jazz, if you put that on, my hope was that you were gonna feel a little bit better, you know. Yeah. And I think that's something I learned from all those clubs that I played in Rochester. About music's got to be about feeling. It's got to be about communicating. And it's got to be about human emotion, and it's got to be about coming together as folks. You know. Yeah. And I think that, and hopefully I'm continuing to kind of integrate those two aspects of my musical personality, like the compositional and the just heart and below the waist, you know, part. You know, I hope.
I want to talk about this through composed thing and the way the integration of ensemble. And I feel like this record that you made with Tim Garland, Jeff Keezer, 2002, the First Storms Nocturnes record, was a great path down that. You know, you guys had such an interplay, and that ensemble, a drummerless ensemble, allows for the composition, to the intricacy and the intimacy of that ensemble to speak, you know?
Man, thank you for bringing that up, man. You know, as I said, Henry, I'm a self-taught musician, and I always say I have more holes in my education than Swiss cheese, man. You know, and I've been trying to like spackle those holes in my whole life, and it's been sort of beautiful because I feel like I'm always a work in progress, you know. But the opportunity, man, again. With of all the people that I played with, I mean, I have so many people to be thankful for. And being self-taught doesn't mean you didn't have a teacher. It meant you had hundreds of teachers.
Right. Absolutely.
You know, and I through a series of circuitous events met Tim Garland and became a fan of his music. And we did an album for Chick Corea's label. Tim did an album when he was playing in Chick's band, and the album was called Made by Walking. Beautiful. Mm-hmm. That's a quote from Machado, the Spanish poet. He says, "There are no paths. Paths are made by walking." And Tim made this beautiful album that I'm playing on about half of it, and Chick is on, and Avishai Cohen, and Jeff Ballard, and Gerard Presenter, and Keezer, and the last track on the album, it was called Trinity, and Tim wanted to try this chamber trio concept, and he felt so happy about it. Afterwards, he said, "I want to make this a band," and he started this chamber trio called Storms Nocturnes, and we did a lot of playing over the years. Made 3 albums, but it was some of the most beautiful and the most challenging music I've ever played. And every time we'd get ready to do a tour or to make a new record, Tim and Keezer would send me music, and I would look at it, and the first thing I would do is curse them out under my breath, because it was like, oh, I got to learn this hard music. But as it started to unfold, it was like the most beautiful music to be a part of. And Tim is an amazing composer. Like, he's an amazing classical composer. His symphonic writing is just profound.
Yeah.
So to get a chance to play this amazing music with these guys, with these just transcendent players, and realizing that the vibes parts were written for me felt like such an honor. And I had to shed that music so I'd be confident. By the time we got into the studio, I would have it under my fingers, because keeping up with those guys is no joke, man. But
you embrace that. You did so well on those records, and they're beautiful, and your contributions in every way are fitting, and it seems like a perfect evolution that you have these gorgeous compositions on these later records. I'm thinking specifically of Her Sanctuary, which you recorded on your 2012 Motema release signing.
Oh man, thank you
I
for
love
mentioning
that
that.
piece of music, and that piece of music was also just recorded by London Symphony Orchestral Percussion, and a really nice version curated by Gerard Presenter. Is that right, or no?
Actually, Neil Percy, the principal percussionist of the London Symphony. Yeah.
Wow.
Man, that was such a gift, Hannes, man. It's so deep, man, to think that the London Symphony percussion ensemble, so all the percussionists from the symphony, wanted to do a project of their own, for mallet percussionists and piano, on some of the tunes piano, but that I would never in a million years have thought that I would have a composition of mine represented on an album by the London Symphony Percussion Ensemble, with other works, the other composers being Makoto Ozone, Matt Chick Corea, Willem Simcock, and Steve Reich,
Yeah.
And I just go, well, okay, okay.
But it's an absolutely fitting evolution, and I do want to talk about Love is a Pendulum, because you wrote everything on the album, and it's beautiful, and it feels like it reaches this beautiful moment, but it's also very compositionally deep and allows for a lot of subtlety.
Can
you talk about that inspiration with that music, how you conceived that music, what sort of things you were feeling about writing that stuff?
Man, it's really interesting, man, because 90% of the time I'm inspired by words in some shape or form.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, it could be after reading a novel, or sometimes it could be just hearing a turn of phrase, hearing somebody say something, in line at a grocery store, just hearing, but in this case, it was a poem that was written by my friend Barbara Spraga. She's an amazing singer and fine artist and jewelry maker, and I'd always been a fan of hers, and I bumped into her one night at the Iridium, listening to Bobby Hutcherson and Jackie McLean. And she came up to me and she said, after a lovely conversation, she said, I was wondering if I could give you this little book. It's a book of poetry that I've written. And I said, oh, of course, I would love to. And I put it by my bedstand, and I would read from it, occasionally. And I came across this poem called Love is a Pendulum. And I'm going to get verklempt now, excuse me. But it's this beautiful poem where it's 5 verses, and each verse begins with a metaphor or a comparison or something talking about the the attributes, joys, and difficulties of love. You know, and the first verse says, "Love is the tide," and it expresses love as the tide, and a beautiful metaphor she expresses, you know, for that. And then love is a pendulum, because the way it swings back and forth, you know, sometimes you're in the zone, sometimes you're not, but it's wearing a beautiful arc, you know, that always comes back to that place of love, you know. Love is perpetual motion. Love is letting go, you know. And I'm reading this poem, and I just went down to the piano and started to play the piano with no agenda whatsoever. And the first thing that I wrote were these arpeggios based on minor flat six chords that kind of go through like a tritonic system. And it sounded like this sounds like the pendulum, you know.
Wow. You there, Joe? Whoops.
Oh yeah. Are you there?
Are we still here? Joe,
Yeah.
you're frozen. Oh,
I'm here.
Oh, there you go. You're back. You're back.
Great. So I wouldn't have written that piece if it wasn't for that poem of Barbara's. And I wrote it from the middle out. I started with "Love is a Pendulum," which is a middle verse, and then I wrote kind of toward the beginning and finishing it. And I'm so grateful to her, because I wouldn't have written it if it weren't for that poem, you know.
Wow.
And since actually, Henry, I got to do it with the Cagliari Chamber Orchestra in Sardinia, that I was able to expand it for chamber orchestra and perform it with them. So it was great to see it have another life on top of the original one. But the people involved in "Love is a Pendulum," it was my, if I remember correctly, it was my working band. It was Robert Rodriguez on piano, Terry Angoli on drums, Ricardo Rodriguez on bass, Donnie McCaslin, who was amazing, Rosario Giuliani, who you and I have worked with, who was amazing, and Paul Ballenbeck. And Victor Provost, who's a steel pan player, who's an amazing steel pan player. And the last piece on the album is called "Embrace," and I wrote it for Victor. And amazingly, man, I would have never thought that I would have wanted to record with steel pan. It's like, I would never record with a steel pan player. But I didn't choose to do that because of the instrument. I did it because of Victor Provost, just because of his musical concept and just what an amazing musician he was. I wouldn't have cared if he played saxophone or harmonica or spoons, for that matter. I just wanted Victor Provost on the album. And everybody just came together and gave, 150%, man. So very grateful. Yeah.
But you've always written, at least that I've known you, it's been a long time that you've been writing songs that are inspired by words. And I remember Saturn's Child, this beautiful ballad that you wrote that we used to play back in the 90s. And that's a gorgeous piece of music.
Oh, thank you. And that came from a book called Care of the Soul by Thomas More, where he says, those who are disposed to moods of melancholy, they say at such times we're under the influence of the planet Saturn. And I'm somebody who goes to that. I have a dark aspect, and I suffer with kind of trying to, raise myself out of that dark kind of a proclivity. And I related to that idea when I saw it in the book, and I said, I'm definitely a child of Saturn, and the melody came out of the phrase. Yeah. So that's a perfect example, man. Yeah.
Well, this stuff is so beautiful. Subtle Disguise is a great foil for that record. And, being a different sort of record, I think these are gorgeous albums that you've been doing.
Thank you. That means a lot to me coming from you, man, because you're somebody as a writer, as a player, and as a producer of great recordings, man. That means a lot to me, bro. So thank you. Thanks.
Joe, we're almost out of time, but if you had a second, just because I think it's so much fun, and I think it was great that they called you, and I think it's great that you did it, and I think they're a cool band. Can you tell quickly about the Beastie Boys?
Man, that was such a blast, and I do have a story. Have we got time for just like a minute?
Yeah.
To tell the story, because it's really,
we have 4 minutes left.
It's proof positive of what an idiot I am, man. I got called. I was recommended by John Patitucci. I got called by an agency called like the Gold Mountain Agency in Los Angeles, and I get a phone call. Would you be available to come in and record with the Beastie Boys? And I was like, hell's yeah, you know? And I went into the studio, and it was Euphoria Sound on 12th Street in the Village. And I expected to go in, you know, I knew the Beastie Boys from like, you know, I hadn't been following them. And I knew them from like, you know, you gotta fight for your right to party. So I expected to go in and see these maniacs in the studio. And I went in, and Adam and the two mics were chilling in the control room, and they were listening to Cal Jader live at the Black Hawk.
Wow.
And Gets a Go-Go. And we talked about music, and we talked about Cal, and we talked about, and they said, this is kind of the vibe we're going for on this tune's, you know, Song for Junior, and we'd like to have that Cal vibe. And they were like super knowledgeable and super chill and super lovely cats, man. And so after the session, which was a total pleasure, like some real grown up, cool, you know, cool people. I forget who it was. If it was Adam, I think he asked me about would I be into doing it like live dates with them at some point. Like, would you like to, you know, do, you know? And I said, yeah. And Henry, I was thinking, yeah, I'll play Wetlands with you. You know, it's like I'll play. I had no idea, man. I was like, you know, these guys are has-beens, man. You know, they've had their time. Yeah, sure, whatever, man. Sure, you know, give me a call. Yeah, and I didn't think twice about it, man. And I went to Europe for something, and this is going like 8 months later. I'm such an idiot. I'm going in a cab, going to Brooklyn from Midtown, and I pass Madison Square Garden, and on the marquee it says a Tribe Called Quest, and huge letters on the marquee, the Beastie Boys. And the part I forgot to mention was on Song for Junior, the tune that I did with them. I played something on the vibes, and they said to me, "Oh, could you play that again? And could you play that here and here and here?" And I thought to myself, you know, for a second, I went, "Oh, well, that's writing now. They want me to take this idea that I played and repeat it here and here and here. Should I ask for, you know, some writing?" And I thought to myself, nah, this record's not going to sell anything. I'll just leave it alone. But I was just going to say that I thought to myself, should I be asking for a writing credit? Because now I'm repeating the lick, you know, 3 times through the song. And I thought, no, I'm not going to bother. These guys aren't going to sell any records. And I'm glad I didn't, man, because they were such beautiful cats, and I would have really seemed like a jerk, you know, to become a businessman at that point. But I just had no idea how huge the Beasties still were, and just to say, man, you know, they were beautiful cats, and really soulful and just really cool. Sometimes, man, I think that sometimes rock musicians and hip hop musicians and, you know, soul musicians sometimes have an element that sometimes I think is missing from jazz musicians. I think they think more out of the box. I think a lot of times they're more open to a broader palette than some jazz musicians are. You know, I read Patti Smith's autobiography. What was it called? Just Kids? And
I think so.
Patti Smith talked about walking past St. Peter's and realizing she was passing Albert Eiler's funeral and how devastated she was at the death of Albert Eiler. Wow. And I just went, wow, that's deeply soulful, you know, from a punk musician, someone who's known as being a punk musician, that she knew what was going on in our scene, you know. And I felt that way about the Beasties, man. They were like very knowledgeable, and what a gift to be able to do that. Thanks. I have to thank John for that, man, for the recommendation.
Joe, I want to ask you to share this story of a famous pop rock musician being Gracious that you shared with me, and I'm only going to cue you about the story by saying that you looked down and you saw the shoes, and someone who helped you with your vibes outside the studio
Oh man, you remember that story, man?
Told me that
Well,
story.
somebody who you have, done so much wonderful stuff with, man. But it was just man, it was just this like quintessential New York story, man. Wow, you remember that? Wow, man. I was recording at, I want to say it was the old Hit Factory, and I forget who I was recording with, but I was finishing a session, and I had my vibes. The vibraphone I was playing, I didn't even have cases for. So I was playing my big Musser M75 that's like a piece of furniture, and there were all these pieces. Bro, I remember it like it was yesterday. And I was in the lobby of the studio downstairs at the entrance. And I was
54th Street,
yeah,
right where
I want to
Gibson
say
used
54.
to be? Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I was trying to manage all these parts of this vibraphone to get it into the cab, and all of a sudden I saw these beautiful shoes. I was looking down trying to pick up the pieces, and I saw these. I still remember the shoes. They were like these oxblood, kind of pointy-toed, beautiful oxblood shoes, and I saw the bottom of this beige camel hair coat, this beautiful coat, and I took the piece of the vibraphone and I kind of started to bend up, and when I looked up, it was David Bowie. And David was so, it makes me cry, man, because he was so sweet. He said, let me help you with your stuff. And he helped me carry my vibes out to the cab and helped me put my shit into the cab. And I just said, thank you so much, David. He said, my pleasure. And he went up to the studio to do what he was going to do. And I went home. And I bumped into him a time or two since then, because I used to go to a restaurant called Japonica on University Place, and he and his wife, I bumped into him there once, and I bumped into him in Central Park once, and it was just then I got to, at the third time I saw him, I didn't say anything to him, but at Japonica, it was sort of late, and the place was starting to quiet down, and I just walked over and reminded him of that, and just said it, and just thanked him again, and he was just more than gracious, man. And what you're doing, man, is keeping his legacy alive in the beautiful way that you're doing with Lazarus and with the music of David Bowie, man, is so beautiful, man. And I think that you guys had a beautiful relationship, man, and you and people like you who loved him so much are gonna keep him with us for a long time to come, man. So so thank you, man.
Well, thank you. I didn't bring it up to turn it around to David Bowie, but just as a firsthand story that you shared with me about people being gracious, and I think it's so important. And I remember you being gracious with me when I got the opportunity to play with you, and you introduced me to Jeff Tain Watts, and you introduced me to a bunch of musicians, and you were a mentor and experience of getting to play with you. So there's very much a pay it forward vibe there.
Man, I wanted to say two things just very quickly. One is I didn't think about that story with David for a long time, but it's the actual manifestation of something I try to teach, and I forgot about that story. When I teach, when I do a master class, there's something that I call hold the door, and it's about if you're a player who's really gifted and you're just better than the other students at the school. It's not for you to be cocky or to be arrogant or to feel better than. It's an opportunity for you to hold the door for the students who maybe are struggling a bit more, and how important that is. And here you remind me of someone literally holding the door for me, someone who's actually manifesting that grace in real time, because it wasn't a metaphor for him. He was actually holding the door for me, Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that. And the other thing that I wanted to say is, man, when I met you, I was doing this band called Wirewalkers at that place in Soho. And I had heard about you. I needed a keyboardist, sort of like, someone who could fill the keyboard chair. And I called you, man, and you came in, and you just, you were young at the time too. You played with Bill Evans, I think, but you were, you know, still like fresh on the scene, and you came in and just raised the bar, man. It was like from the time you started playing with that band, it became a thing, man. And it was like, and I think you've continued to do that, like give like 150% to everything that you do, because you could have come and just made the gig and split. But I remember you coming in and bringing all your gear, because maybe this keyboard would have that sound for that tune, and maybe this would sound good here, and just doing like 3 times as much as you needed to just to make the gig. And I think that kind of work ethic and that vibe that you have has stayed through all the great stuff that you've done, man. And, you know, I admire you, bro.
Well, I admire you too, right back at you. And I learned all that from guys like you and people that I was lucky to meet through people like you, you know, Jeff Watson and Mark, the great, you know, rest in peace, Mark Ledford, and all those great musicians. And I know that we all feel thankful to get to have that musical community, and I look forward to the time that we can do it again.
I'm looking forward to it, and I really hope the time is coming, man, because I feel like it's forces are lining up, man, for us to do it again, and it would be an honor for me, man, to to make more music with you, man. So,
Joe, thank you so much for sharing yourself with us today. And
thank you, bro.
Great.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor, man. Thanks for having me.
Everybody check out Joe Locke, his website, and he's got all
JoeLocke.com, yo.
JoeLocke.com. And also, you just recently got fully geared up to record at home too, right? So
I got my Shure KSM 32s, yo. I'm ready to deal here, man.
Yeah, if you want just the best vibes that you could possibly get, drop him a line.
Beautiful. Thank you, Henry. Thanks, bro.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, man. See you soon, man.
Have a great day.
Thanks, bro.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of The Right Key. If you enjoyed the episode, there's a lot more coming. Please click the subscribe and like buttons below. If you want to know more about me or our guests, you can find lots of information in the link just below the video. See you next time.